Paperwork or people? What matters most? As requested by a lot of you, in today's session I'll be discussing 2024 mains question, and the question which I intend to discuss is somewhat like this. Mindless addiction to form, ignoring the substance of the matter, results in the rendering of injustice. The key words here are form and substance. Kindly note that. A perceptive civil servant is one who ignores such literalness and carries out true intent. The key word here is perceptive civil servant. Examine the above statement with suitable illustrations. The key word here is examine again. Before I start discussing how to write an answer for this question, let me briefly talk about writing answers a bit. Now, one of the biggest questions students often ask me is how to approach a question. Now, when it comes to approaching a question, you need to look at three important things in a question. First is, what is the directive? What does the question ask you to do? Like in this question, the question expects you to examine one. Next, you should look at the context. What is the context here? The whole context of this question, the question is placed in the context of civil services or public administration. Third, the concept. What are the concepts involved in this question? There are a couple of concepts involved. Understanding these three first is most important when it comes to writing answers. If you all have been following the question when I was reading it out, the key word was examine. And the word examine is a directive, or in popular terms, the demand of the question. The question expects you all to examine or analyze the two concepts of form and substance in the context of civil services or public administration. Before I get into explaining how to write an answer for this question, let me make one thing very clear. I don't intend to talk about answer writing in a very conventional manner. I don't intend to just discuss the answer. No. I don't want to do that. I want to convert this into a proper conceptual session. I intend to talk about, along with how to write an answer, I also intend to talk about the meaning of form and substance. What exactly form and substance mean? What's the difference between these two? What is the tension between these two? What are the dilemmas involved in form and substance? Who is a perceptive civil servant? And why a perceptive civil servant will ignore the literalness? The first statement of the question, mindless addiction to form, ignoring the substance of the matter leads to injustice, is a critique of bureaucratic rigidity. If you look at all bureaucratic systems, the typical Weberian bureaucratic system is very rigid. And this statement captures the ethical dilemma every single civil servant faces. Should I adhere to rules, that is form, or should I adhere to intent of the rule, that is substance? In the context of Indian public administration, almost all civil servants face this dilemma. And the dilemma is, what should I prioritize? Should I prioritize adherence to rule, that is the form or letter of law, or should I prioritize the intent, the substance of the rule or the law? But there's a tendency among civil servants to over-focus or over-prioritize on something called rule. And by doing so, they end up being a little inefficient. And by doing so, sometimes instead of serving justice, injustice is served. This is where the concept of perceptive civil servant comes in. In fact, the word perceptive civil servant implies a wise civil servant. A wise civil servant is the one who knows how to balance form and substance. Let's proceed to understanding what does the word form mean. What does the word substance mean in the context of public administration? Form or letter of the law implies little interpretation of the legal statutes or codes. In simple words, a person who adheres to form or letter of the law will be obsessed with exact wordings of the law or the codes. This is an approach which is favored by legal positivists or formalists, and they personally believe every single public official or a civil servant, their job is to implement the law as it is. This perspective, letter of law perspective or form perspective, is favored by a lot of civil servants. Why? Because it eliminates personal interpretation. It eliminates biases. It eliminates arbitrary decision making. And one of the key features or key duties of a civil servant is to be procedurally fair. And the best way to be fair is this: stick to the rule as it is. So that's why this approach is favored by a lot of them, but not realizing by over focusing or by emphasizing too much on rule or form or letter of law, they may end up compromising with the intent or the goal. On the other hand, civil servants or administrators who favor substance of the law, or I should say spirit of the law, will look at the intent, the purpose of the rule. Now, they will not look at the little meaning or exact wordings of the law. They'll be more focused on what's the purpose of it. What's the intent of the rule? What is it trying to achieve? What is the moral goal of this particular rule? So that's why when these people, the people who favor substance, will always function not by the exact wording of the law, they will focus more on the exact intent of the law. What is the law trying to achieve? What's the rule trying to achieve? So that's why people who favor substance are so focused on fairness and justice that they don't mind being a little compassionate also. Because ultimately the goal has to be served. So the intent has to be taken care of here. Now that we have understood what is form, what is the letter of the law, and what is the substance, the spirit of the law, let's take the debate further. The letter of law is closely tied to formalism, where it's the form or the legal structure that matters. A public official who calls himself a formalist will focus on the exact words of the code or the procedure or the rule or the law without any consideration. I repeat, without any consideration for intent, the social purpose or the moral purpose of that particular rule. In contrast to formalists, the people who adhere to spirit of law or who adhere to something called substance factor, they will be moved by intent of the law or the rule or the procedure. So they're a little flexible. In fact, one of the criticisms people have against formalists is this only, that formalists don't make room for exception. Formalists don't make room for unforeseen circumstances. They're too rigid. And that's why substance matters. By focusing more on the goal, they're more aware of the context, they're more aware of the social situation, they're more aware of the moral goals of the rule or the law or the procedure. Before I explore the difference between form and substance, let me add some information for all of you. The information is, where does this topic fall in your syllabus? In your syllabus, there's a topic called public administration ethics. When you study public administration ethics, you need to understand the form and substance, letter and spirit of the law. At the same time, there's a topic in your syllabus called ethical dilemmas. And one of the biggest ethical dilemma a public servant confronts is this: what should I follow, the rule of law or the intent of the law? So let's get into exploring the differences. Let's look at the difference in definition first. Form refers to the literal interpretation and strict adherence to the written rules, procedures, or laws without consideration of the broader context or intention. While substance refers to the broader purpose or intent behind the law, focusing on achieving fairness, justice, or the intended outcome, even if it means departing from formal rules. Let's come to objectives. Form, the purpose of form is to ensure consistency, predictability, and compliance with the exact wording of laws or procedures, while substance seeks to achieve fairness, justice, and the underlying goals of the law, often emphasizing outcomes over procedures. When it comes to focus, form concentrates on procedural correctness and the exact application of the law as written, while substance focuses on the ethical or moral intent of the law. It prioritizes ultimate purpose over literal compliance. When it comes to rigidity, form is highly rigid. It makes little room for flexibility. While substance or spirit of the law is more flexible, it allows interpretation, discretion based on context to meet the law's intent. Other key difference lies in nature. Form is more legalistic, rule-bound, focusing on compliance with formalities and technicalities, while substance is more pragmatic, goal-oriented, focusing on fulfilling the purpose and the spirit of the law. The primary concern of form is to ensure that rules are applied equally and uniformly regardless of the outcome, while substance, on the other hand, ensures that the law produces just outcomes, particularly in diverse or complex situations where rigid rules may cause harm. A fine example of form can be strict documentation requirement for welfare schemes, which implies exact documents are needed to access welfare benefits, even if the person is eligible but lacks documents. While spirit of the law allows provisional access to welfare benefits for those lacking documents but genuinely need ensuring that the program serves its purpose. Let's cover the last difference, which is in terms of criticism. Form is criticized for being overly bureaucratic, rigid, and disconnected from real life outcomes. The key word is rigid and disconnected, while substance is criticized for allowing too much discretion, leading to inconsistent application of the law. Just imagine you're a block development officer and you're working in a district where starvation persists among certain section of population. And your job is to ensure no starvation deaths happen. And your job is to ensure that everybody gets grains on time. And there's a procedure for it. The procedure is the person who claims or the person who wants those grains needs to have some identification, needs to have either birth proof or either Aadhaar card, some documentation is needed just to prove the bona fides. And one fine day, a family comes, a family of 5, 3 children, mother and father. This family of 5 have been living in your block, but the problem was they didn't have documents, they didn't have bona fides to prove. And the mother, father were illiterate. And they were working as landless laborers. And the problem was without bona fides, you cannot give them grains because that's what the procedure demands. And sadly, they were starving. They had nothing to eat for almost 4 days, and you can make it out from their faces itself. They were in a very bad shape. Now, what will you do here? Will you stick to letter of the law, that is, establish the bona fides, then claim your grains? Or will you be sticking to spirit of the law? That is, the purpose of the scheme is to help them. So you'll just make a small exception, ensure that they are fed. What will you do here? The dilemma between form and substance became very clear. In fact, it came out in the open during Aadhaar initiative. Aadhaar was a great initiative. The purpose of Aadhaar was to streamline delivery of services, to eliminate fraud. The purpose was good, the intent was great. But when Aadhaar was strictly implemented, a lot of issues came up. For example, a lot of people could not enroll themselves in Aadhaar card. Why? Because lack of infrastructure or probably lack of bona fides. In fact, for some, biometrics became an issue. The scanners could not read thumbprints or fingerprints. So because of all these issues, a lot of them could not enroll. And without enrollment, they were not able to access the services. And this actually hurt the weaker section of the population. So that's why strict implementation of Aadhaar led to little compromise with the goals. The goal was streamlined service delivery. But the goal was not achieved because of too much emphasis on procedure, too much emphasis on documentation, form and substance dilemma. Actually, later, even Supreme Court stepped in, and Supreme Court was in favor of something called spirit of the law, substance, the intent. If you think Aadhaar card is an overused example, I'll give you a good one. And this deals with hawker policy of BMC, that is Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation. And just read up on that. Let's try to understand the third part of the question, that is, who is a perceptive civil servant? If you ask me, a perceptive civil servant is somebody who's wise enough to understand how to balance rule and substance. So striking this balance is a hallmark of a perceptive civil servant. Let's understand the characteristics further. Empathy and sensitivity. A perceptive civil servant must possess empathy and sensitivity to the lived experience of citizens. This involves understanding the diverse contexts in which rules are applied and recognizing when rigid adherence to procedures may cause harm. Moral judgment. Public administrators must use moral judgment to navigate the complexities of their work. This means distinguishing between when to apply the letter of the law and when to interpret the law in a way that fulfills its broader purpose. A perceptive civil servant is one who exercises discretionary power responsibly. And this means they're able to balance the need for consistency with the need for flexibility, ensuring that decisions are both legally sound and morally justifiable. A key virtue a perceptive civil servant will display is moral courage. That is, they'll not shy away from challenging the status quo or rigid procedures if they lead to injustice. When it comes to decision making, perceptive civil servant is more pragmatic. That is, they'll combine adherence to procedures with the flexibility needed to achieve just outcomes. Let's come to this last bit of this question, ignoring the littleness. Now, why it matters? Why it matters is if you look at Indian public service especially, there are a lot of wonderful initiatives, right from right to education to MG Narega, and these are all initiatives with lofty goals, midday meal schemes, very lofty goals, big intents. The purpose is great, but the problem with all these schemes are the implementation. The problem with these schemes are why they don't work well, why they don't serve the goals are because too much focus on rules, too much focus on the form. That is why a perceptive civil servants are needed. Now that we explored the concepts involved in the question, now it's time to learn the structure. There are two ways to write an answer for this question. One is the conventional way. Conventional way is you introduce the answer, then you explain the meaning of form and substance. Then you talk about perceptive civil servants. Then you come down to an example just to make your point, then you conclude. It's a very conventional way of doing it. But if I was writing this answer, if I was taking this exam, I would have approached it a little differently. I would have been a little unconventional here. I would have started with an example. I would have used, say, hawker policy of BMC, or I would have started with Aadhaar card. Then using that as an example as a springboard, I would have come down to something called explaining form. How form comes into play in Aadhaar initiative. How substance is ignored in Aadhaar initiative. By using this example, I explain the meaning of the word form and substance. Then I'll come down to how a perceptive civil servant can balance both form and substance. And how a perceptive civil servant will focus more on the substance or the intent of the procedure or the goal of the law. And by focusing on the intent, how they'll ignore the littleness and how ignoring the littleness matters. And then I'll conclude my answer. So these are two ways of writing an answer for this question. Along with explaining the question, I also dealt with a key topic in public administration ethics. Do let me know in comment section whether this format works, because the issue is a lot of you want me to discuss the PYQs, but I don't want to discuss the PYQs alone. I want to add some value to the discussion. So that's why I did it like this. So just let me know if this works or not in the comment section. So long. See you all soon.